Welcome to A Game of Ice and Fire, a video series devoted to a Song of Ice and Fire wargame by Cool Mini or Not. We cover all aspects of the hobby with tactics and list build videos, painting tutorials of varying levels, and battle reports. This is the first full faction overview I've attempted, and the reason why I'm okay with doing it with the Bolton, or not Boltons, but the neutral faction right now is that the releases are pretty limited in terms of just what's out there right now. And if you go through and talk about one of the commanders, you're going to be hitting like 90% of the faction while you're at it. So I figured it's just best to kind of wrap all of this into one big overview of the entirety of the neutral faction as it exists right now, and then as other houses come out, because I have a feeling that the rest of the neutral stuff is going to get rolled out in specific houses. I don't think we'll ever see releases other than hero boxes that are going to be multi-housed. So without further delay, let's check in with the Boltons. We're going to start off talking about the commanders and then their attachment version as well. So let's get going with Roose Bolton. Now, as a commander, Roose Bolton comes as an NCU and has the ability Horrific Rumors. Whenever you claim a tactics zone on the tactics board, you can replace the effect of the board or the position that you've taken with up to 2 enemy combat units becoming panicked. That really plays into Roose's style with his cards, or the type of game that he's going to play. And the first one is Fear Keeps a Man Alive. This triggers when an engaged panicked enemy activates. You expend the panic token from that enemy. That enemy must make a morale test. On a failure, the only action they can make this turn is retreat. And then one House Bolton unit they're engaged with can restore up to D3 wounds. The next one is A Flayed Man Has No Secrets. This triggers at the start of any turn. You can expend a panic token from an enemy unit to look at one opponent's hand of tactics cards and then pick one to discard from their hand. The last one is Calculated Cruelty. When a panicked enemy activates, expend a panic token from that enemy. That unit and its attachments lose all abilities this round. If they're within short range of a House Bolton unit, they restore D3 wounds. So we have a small healing element within Roose Bolton's tactics cards with Fear Keeps a Man Alive and Calculated Cruelty. But the real big idea behind Bolton is that behind Roose Bolton is that he is very control oriented through these panic tokens. So it kind of goes into this whole, like, he's a cruel calculating tactician. None of his cards are really going to break open anything for you. These are all going to be solutions to issues that you might be having, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a weird version of control. Plus the panic tokens that they would have on them are also useful as well, so you can kind of get dual purpose, like not dual purpose, but you can choose which one you're going to need the most at that point in time. And with the base tactics deck having a way or two to recycle old cards, getting some of these back is going to keep perpetuating that theme for you, especially given that a lot of the Bolton units can already put panic tokens on things. Now with Roose Bolton's attachment version, he comes in at 3 points, which is pretty pricey for an attachment, but we get Ferocious Assault, so anything they charge becomes panicked. He brings the house affiliation ability with him as well. And then the last one that comes on him is Prey on Fear. Each time an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, this unit can restore up to 2 wounds. Now, Roose Bolton's attachment seems a little bit overpriced right now, but I have a feeling as we get more neutral options, turning one of those non-Bolton units into a Bolton unit is going to make Roose Bolton, the attachment version, a lot more valuable. And then you can have something like Ramsay leading the army, Roose Bolton attaching to some other really good neutral unit, and then kind of turning them into a more Bolton focused unit with having the ability to put a panic token on someone when you charge them, as well as being able to force the idea that you want them to be failing panic checks so that you can restore wounds on them. So overall, Roose Bolton in his commander version is really powerful in the faction as it stands right now. But Roose Bolton as an attachment is probably going to get more value later on in the game's life cycle. I wouldn't see myself putting Roose Bolton on a unit that currently exists in the neutral faction as it stands. The other commander available to the Bolton side of the neutrals is Ramsay Snow, or Ramsay Bolton. His commander version shows up in the form of a unit attachment and has the order Flay Them All. When an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, one other enemy unit within long range of that unit must also make a panic test. And then he also has the house affiliation Bolton keyword. And that's just revisiting back on Roose Bolton. Could mean something more in the future, but right now it's not a big deal. The order is pretty nice. Being able to trigger 2 panic tests in a turn is a really beneficial strategy for the Boltons from the neutral side, especially since the rest of their units are pretty good at either triggering more panic tests or putting out panic tokens. For tactics cards, Ramsay brings Sadistic Games. At the start of a friendly turn, your opponent chooses one of the following, and then you declare the targets only after they've chosen which one of the 2 modes between the 2 modes. Up to 2 enemy combat units become panicked, or one combat unit suffers D3 plus 2 automatic hits. This is a really interesting card in that you're already going to be triggering a bunch of panic tests with a Bolton faction anyways, or a Bolton-led neutral army. So I can see your opponent not wanting to panic, or being a little bit more reluctant to panic things, because a lot of us would just see this and say, oh, well, I'm not going to let my unit take 3 to 5 automatic hits. But then when you look at the way Ramsay triggers panic tests frequently, getting those panic tokens might not be the best thing either. So it's going to be a difficult choice for your opponent, and either way it's not going to be a good solution that they end up coming to. The next one is our Blades Are Sharp. When a friendly unit attacks with melee, if they're targeting a panicked enemy, this attack gains +1 to hit and rolls +2 dice. If it's a House Bolton unit, the defender also becomes vulnerable. So this is a good way to forward your melee presence on the table with some of Ramsay's other cards, along with other Bolton units. You can get that panic token to happen quite frequently or almost regularly. So I think that our Blades Are Sharp is a nice way to boost your combat potential, and it'll also make your opponent have a harder time selecting between the 2 modes on Sadistic Games, knowing that that card exists. The last one Ramsay brings is Cruel Methods. This triggers at the start of the round. One friendly unit may make a free attack action. If it does not destroy an enemy, it must then take a panic test and suffer -3 to the roll. If it's House Bolton unit, it may use its highest attack dice value and can reroll any misses. So this is a really good card for pushing further on attacks where you're in like maybe the mid game. I could see this being used early game if you go into a unit and you just almost obliterate it and you just need that little extra push to take it out. But starting round 2 or round 3, Cruel Methods becomes a bit more not guaranteed, but a bit more of a sure thing, because you have whittled the units down, and since you're going to be putting it on a House Bolton unit anyways, getting the highest attack die value is going to be good as well, since most of the House Bolton units are pretty squishy but have a lot of attacks, so they're kind of glassy in that sense. So we'll move on to, well, before I move on to Ramsay's attachment, since we've seen both the commander versions, there's two very different strategies between the two members of the house. So Roose Bolton has much more of a control oriented aspect, but it's almost like his control is trying to forward you wins in the combat game, whereas Ramsay is putting out raw aggression and really kind of trying to end the enemy in multiple ways, either through force of attacks or trying to get them with all these panic tests that he'll be triggering and being able to get the most out of the panic tokens that he might put down. So now we have Ramsay Snow the Sadist, also a 3-point attachment, but he does come with like another body with another ability. So the attachment version of Ramsay brings the House Bolton affiliation. So again, same thing with Roose, where this is going to be maybe more effective or more valuable in the future as we get more units. But the other ability that Ramsay brings is Cut Them Down. While engaged, when an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, they suffer 2 additional wounds. And this is, if you're playing it as it exists right now, Ramsay, the attachment, would be in the Roose Bolton commanded list. So having all those panic tokens that he can put out, this kind of does double duty for you. You can either choose to use the panic tokens to enact some of Roose Bolton's big commander cards, or you can use the panic tokens to try and get things to fail, or get your enemy to fail some panic checks with Ramsay's unit, and then just further turn the dial up on the amount of models they're going to lose. Ramsay also brings Theon Greyjoy, or Reek, and the ability that he comes with is the order Set an Example. When this unit activates, one enemy unit within long range becomes panicked, and then you roll a die, and on a 5 or better, you kill Theon. So it gets slightly easier to kill a unit, which I don't think is a really big deal, because if you lose the body, it's not a huge problem. But you're guaranteed at least one panic token out of this, and that could be the difference between killing a unit and not killing a unit, depending on how the panic test goes. So I think that there's a lot of synergy within the units of this faction so far, just by looking at the commanders and the attachments, and I'll touch a little bit more on that by the time we're done. But now we can move into the limited amount of units that are available. Currently, like at the time of this video, the Boltons only have access to 3 units. The 4th one is the Bolton Blackguard, which now have rules but aren't out yet. So we'll start with the base troop, is what I would call them, the cheap like flagship guys of the army, the House Bolton Cutthroats. They are an average speed. They've got a not great save and a not great morale. I mean, it's a 7. It's average, but average in this game almost seems bad with how many ways you can negate or knock down someone's morale stat. They have a pretty good attack value. They hit on 3 pluses. They roll 8 dice, then 6, so a little bit of a drop off. But then going to 4 kind of hurts. They lose each one of theirs. They decay, but the 8 and 6 is still kind of decent when you're looking at it from that perspective. But the ability that they come with is Spiked Mace. If this attack targets an enemy that hasn't activated, they become vulnerable, and they also have Vicious on their attack. So the Cutthroats are nice for making those panic checks a lot worse for your opponent, and with all of the panic tokens we're throwing out or any other modifiers we might be giving, they can really get a lot of work done between Vicious, and if they do end up getting the vulnerable opportunist, I guess, then that's also a good ability to try and cut down things. They only come in at 5 points, so you're not paying for a really survivable unit, but you're paying for one that has quite a bit of output and can get to the middle of the table at a decent pace. The next unit we'll go into are the House Bolton Bastards Girls. This is a funky unit that takes a little bit of finesse but they have a decent speed, same as the cutthroats. Their armor stat is horrible. They have no armor, but it just means that Sundering's kind of wasted on them, so just look at it that way. Their morale is really decent at a 5+. They have they hit on 3s whether they're shooting or attacking. They do have a long range bow, which is really important. Then with the tracker's bow, they always roll 4 dice. They never lose any attack value out of that. And then the Blade and Fang melee attack has a 6, 6, and a 3. So really good for quite a bit of time, and then really crappy towards the end. But even then, it's still not so bad when you consider what they can do with themselves. They have the Order Sick'em. So after this unit completes a ranged attack, the unit can make a free charge against the enemy they targeted. Their longbow has a small ability on it where if they roll a 1 on any of their defense saves, they become vulnerable as well. So another way to stick vulnerable out, but situationally so. If you're doing the math, the Bastards girls at full and medium efficacy are rolling 10 dice if they get that order off every turn. So there's a lot of damage this unit can put out, but I think they need to go for very specific targets. They're very they feel a lot like a scalpel and not so much like the cutthroats where you can just kind of throw them ahead and keep jamming them in, or throwing them at enemies, causing these panic tests. So I think the Bolton Bastards girls, they are very nuanced, and if you're just going to throw them up in the middle of the field, you'll lose them quickly and not really get what the unit's supposed to be doing. They also take attachments really well, even if they come in at 7 points. Most of the attachments for neutral faction do really well on them, and I think that as more things get released from other houses that can also put house affiliation on units, the Bastards girls are going to be a unit that probably sees a lot of rotation with those little mini factions. The last real or released unit we're going to hit is the very popular Flayed Men. So these models are sweet. They look cool. The horses are super heavy armored. They've got flails. They just look sweet. They got the nice, cool sweeping cloaks. But their rules are also legit too. So they're speed 5. They have a 2+ armor save, or not armor save, but defense save, and a 6+ morale. So decent morale, amazing stat for armor. Even if someone's sundering you from the side, you're still rolling 4s to save, which is not terrible. Most times when that happens, you're basically consigning a unit to the abyss at that point. They have 8 attacks full, 6 attacks when they lose their first rank, and they hit on 3s. So they're accurate. They throw a ton of dice. They have, with their War Flail, they have critical blow, so they're getting even more effectiveness out of their attacks, and they have Vicious like the Cutthroat, so they're causing, they more likely than not will kill something. They will cause a panic check, so they're just putting out a ton of damage. And if that wasn't enough, they also have the ability Spread Fear, which says each time an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, another unit within long range becomes panicked. So you're already making it more likely for them to fail that by having Vicious, but then trickling in another panic token, and that works out well for Roose or Ramsay because they both want that kind of thing happening. The Flayed Men are pricey. They come in at 10 points, and that does mean you can take a Roose Bolton-led list with 4 Flayed Men. But if you play against anyone who knows how to take it apart, you will lose often. It's a fun list, but only as good as the people you're playing against, I think. Especially when you start looking at 2-list formats, because there are ways to tech into a list like that and not have... It's not that you're just going to steamroll it, it's just that you have a very good game against them that they're going to have to really work hard to get the upper hand with you. The last unit to talk about is the House Bolton Blackguards. Now, I present a huge disclaimer with this one in that I don't know if these points or the points or any rule on this unit is extremely solidified yet, just because I don't have the release in my hand. So until that happens, I don't believe anything that I hear. But it seems like we can have an idea of what these guys are going to come out as. They're a sad speed 4. They have a 3+ armor save, which is good, and a 6+ morale, so they're almost like flayed men without a horse. They hit on 4s, and their stat is 753, so it decays quite quickly. And then each time, their ability is called Heroic Visage, and each time an enemy targets this unit with a melee attack, that enemy suffers a panic test before resolving the attack. Now, that ability is pretty cool. It means that you might be able to panic them out of having a decent attack stat. These guys are rumored to be between 6 and 7 points, but then have an attachment as well that does something that I forgot. So it's, again, I don't want to dwell on this unit so much just because I don't have the solid rules for them, but they seem like a decent addition to the army. I think they're going to do more than what most people think. Whenever I see a speed 4 unit that costs 7 points, I'm a little bit reserved in my ability or my opinion on the unit. I think at first I just cried them out as not being super great, but I think they have their use, and I play with great axes all the time, and they're a 7.4 speed unit. Granted, the Starks don't care about their speed stat, but I think that the Blackguard will definitely see some play in the Bolton list, and maybe even in some other ones once the rest of the factions come out. But stay tuned for more of these. They have abilities that synergize with panic tests, and that's enough for me to think that they'll be worthwhile taking into a Bolton-led neutral list. So now I'm going to talk about attachments. The one I'm not going to talk about is the one for the Blackguard because I don't know what it is. I heard it, but again, I didn't commit it to memory, nor do I have the ability to believe that that's what the rules are going to be until they're in front of me. So for right now, we're going to talk about the vanilla Bolton attachment. The Dreadfort Captain has the ability called Spread Fear. Each time an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, another unit within long range gets panicked. This is a great 1-point addition to any unit. If I'm taking the Cutthroats, I have a really hard time not putting one of those on every single unit, because when you stack Vicious with this Spread Fear ability, you're going to be really putting out a lot of those panic tokens. Now, I've mostly played the neutral faction from the Roos perspective, so I haven't dabbled too much with Ramsay yet, but a Dreadfort Captain is almost always going to be on every unit I can fit one on, as long as I've got the points too. Not the Bastards Girls, though. The other two attachments have also not been released, but were on the Kickstarter set that came with the Hand of the King deal, so I'm going to talk about them because one of them is really super important, and that's Braun, the Sellsword. So he has the ability Extra Incentive. While you control the coin, this unit gains +1 speed, rolls +2 attack dice, and gains +2 to morale checks. So if you're for the neutral vanilla cards, they're split between the missive and the coin, and the coin is something you'll be wanting to grab most of the time mid-game anyways, just so you can turn on the cards. But having Braun in a unit of something like Bastards Girls, he increases every one of their stats. It's not limited to a certain one, so he takes them from speed 5 to speed 6. Instead of rolling 4 dice for the ranged attack and 6 dice for melee, they roll 6 dice for ranged and 8 dice for melee, pumping out 14 attacks from that unit, plus they get +2 to morale checks. So becoming a 3+ morale, you're not really likely to fail that, even if someone's cranking your morale down really hard. Braun is only a 2-point attachment, so putting it on them doesn't make them feel like you're really sinking a lot of eggs into that basket. I think 10 is the threshold for points where you feel like you're paying quite a bit more than what you feel like you should. Like, you got to get a lot of work out of that unit for that kind of point value. So Braun is amazing on those Bastards Girls. I don't know if I would care too much for him on the Blackguard or the Cutthroats. I just think that he gets a lot of mileage out of those Bastards Girls. If they didn't exist, I don't know if Braun would see many units for me in this army. I mean, taking the cutthroats to like more respectable morale stat and having a ton of attacks and becoming speed 6 is also nice. So maybe I could see putting one in there if the Bastards Girls didn't exist. But almost every Bolton list I'm ever going to make is going to have Bastards Girls in them, and it will be very difficult for me to not put Brawn on that unit. So give it a shot if you don't have access to Brawn. Just like try it once if you're having problems getting these Bastards Girls to turn on. He definitely cranks them up to 11, and it feels really good when they start getting the work done that they need to. The last attachment to talk about is Brienne of Tarth, or Maid of Tarth, sorry. She is also a 2-point attachment and has the ability Knightly Vow. So before deployment, you select one enemy unit. Until the end of the game, that unit's melee attacks gain +1 to hit and roll +2 dice against the enemy. So she's a lot like Brawn in that sense, where she really cranks up the output for that unit. But just for that one thing you've marked, I would really like the ability to switch this around if you've wiped a unit out. But I understand why it is the way it is. Maybe, I know this is wish listing, but maybe pitching a tactics card in order to move the Knightly Vow or redo the Knightly Vow would be sweet. But I guess it really plays into her character, because as soon as she's done with what she set out to do in the story, she's kind of like, what do I do now, I guess. So it makes sense. The other ability she brings is Stalwart. It just gives +2 to morale test rolls for anything in the army, which is nice for this one just because the cutthroats aren't really writing, or they're not putting up good stats in the morale area, and the Blackguard are all right, but I also don't know if I would put Brienne on this unit or on the Blackguard unit because they're so slow. So by the time they actually get to their Knightly Vow target, the game is probably like 2/3 of the way over. So I don't think Brienne has much room in this list. I think if you were trying to switch it up and not have a... If you didn't want to rely on having the coin on the tactics board, you could put Brienne in the unit of Bastards Girls so they could get their one big hit on the unit that they've picked, and then just have, good morale again. But I think she's definitely going to be more useful as more things release. Other than Roose Bolton as a commander, this faction has access to 2 NCUs, and we'll start with the most notorious one as Lord Varys. And he's 4 points, starts the game with 4 order tokens. You can use one of those order tokens to cancel a tactics board ability or an NCU's ability when they come down on the tactics board. He used to have the ability to re-roll the dice by spending another order token, but that got taken away because it was too reliable to just dump your whole order load on a very pivotal point in the game and just shift it that way. So he became very one-dimensional. But now he's got a little bit of a element of risk, even though it's a 3+. So the odds are in your favor when it comes to throwing that die. But being able to just fire him off when you feel like it, when you're just going to get a little bit ahead, is quite nice for him too, instead of just saving him for that one really big moment, even if it never comes. So Varys he's for the neutral faction specifically, Varys is really good in that the base tactics cards for the neutral faction are very, I don't want to say vanilla, but they're very like basic. So Varys gives you another way to add some disruption to your army without having to rely on what your tactics hand looks like, because your models are very set in their conditions, right? So the last NCU is Petyr Baelish. He has the ability Master of the Game. When Petyr claims a zone on the tactics board, he may replace its effect with the effect of an unclaimed zone. Now, I know that Littlefinger doesn't get a lot of rotation in at least the brain space of lists that exist out there. but I think that he is a really good model for the neutral faction right now, and will continue to be a good model as they get more releases, because you really are gunning for getting the most out of your tactics cards with this deck, almost more so than any other faction, really, because the abilities are so much more pronounced when you have the positions that you want, whether it's the tactic or the missive or the coin. So being able to sit on that zone but not have to use the ability, like you can take the coin zone the coin zone early, and then utilize the swords or the maneuver position, because when you're trying to go on to those spots because you want them, you're giving up some of the more powerful ones. Even though I think probably the most useful one is the missive, with being able to draw a bunch of cards and throw conditions out. But getting to maneuver or getting to make an extra attack is really important at certain times, especially for something like your flayed men. So Littlefinger makes it so that you can do that without having to give up your power in your deck. The last NCU is the High Seneschal. Comes in at 0 points, and this is just a fun little card that they included in the Kickstarter. I think people are going to be getting a bunch of these at Adepticon as well, and really he can't do anything. He just sits there and observes the game. It's just a caricature of George R.R. Martin in the style that the art's done for the game, but essentially you get to tell anyone anything about your game afterwards. If you lost your game, you can tell him you won because he is the one cataloging it. I don't know. It's a fun card. When I honestly first looked at it, I was like, ooh, that's going to be my Maester Pycelle, because Pycelle is just a really poopy looking model. But still a neat little thing to have in the game, even if it's not useful in terms of game function. The last thing we need to go ahead and review are the base tactics cards for the neutral deck itself. Now, this functions in a very all-comer sense. It's you have kind of a Swiss Army knife of a tactics deck. There's an answer for every problem, and I think that it's generic enough to where when we bring in other things or other factions or other houses into the neutral the neutral space, this tactics deck is going to work really well for them too, because it really would work well for anyone. The first card we're going to talk about is Cunning Scheme. This triggers at the start of a friendly turn, and you can return one tactics card from your discard pile to your hand. You can remove Cunning Scheme from the game instead of discarding it when it's played. Not can, you have to. If you control the missive, one opponent has to discard one tactics card at random. So this is great for trying to recycle cards from your commander to keep up that theme that your army's playing with. Think about something like Bolton getting calculated cruelty back over and over again, or Ramsay getting his sadistic games back a couple times. All the while, you're also making your opponent pitch cards if you've got that missive, which you want to control with this deck anyways. So it's just a really great all-around card that keeps perpetuating the cycle of your army's theme. The next card is Surprise Strategy. This triggers at the start of any turn and says opponents may not play tactics cards this turn. You can remove this card, or you remove this card from the game instead of discarding it when it's played. And if you control the missive position, you can also return one tactics card from your discard pile to your hand. So this is just another way of, well, first it's another reason to keep controlling the missive, but it's another way of recursion. So even though you have these very generic tactics cards, you're still being able to get the flavorful sense of your army by replaying a lot of those really powerful cards from your neutral NCUs, or I mean commanders, sorry. So it has a decent ability when you play it. You can make sure that your opponent doesn't mess with your plans for a turn, and then you can also, if you're controlling that spot, get some of those cards back to keep hitting up the good times with your great cards. The next one we come across is Adaptive Methods. This triggers anytime, which is strange. I don't think we have another card that I can think of that triggers anytime. But it says you can expend one condition token on an enemy unit as if it were any other condition token. And And with this faction, or with the Boltons in particular, you're going to be putting out a lot of panic tokens. So being able to use this to change those into a vulnerable or weakened is going to really benefit you, and your opponent's not going to quite see it coming. If you happen to control the missive, you can also move one condition token from any unit to any other unit. So you could take one off of a friendly unit and move it to an enemy unit. I think if I'm not quite sure how this interaction works, but I think you can move the condition token before you expend it on someone. But I don't know if the reading on the tactics cards would go from top to bottom in order of operations. So that's something that I'll look into and maybe correct later. But a great card nonetheless, especially if we get other neutral factions that specialize in wanting to put out vulnerable or weakened tokens. The next one is Worth the Reward. When a friendly unit would fail a panic test, you may re-roll that panic test, and if you control the coin zone, you automatically pass that test instead. At first, I thought this was like the potato card of the deck, but there really isn't such a thing as a bad card in this deck, because this can be helpful in just about any situation. I've had points come up where I'm down to 1 or 2 ranks on my my cutthroats, and I need to pass a morale check, or else they're just going to have that unit steamroll through my army or deny a side charge that I've been setting up for. So just being able to throw this down and automatically pass that test is really beneficial. So there's always some situation that comes up where these cards have a lot of value, and that's one of the greatest things about playing the neutral faction. The next card we come up against is Wealth and Cunning. When a friendly unit attacks or is attacked, in each case after the attack dice are rolled, if you're attacking, you deal an additional D3 automatic hits, or +3 hits if you control the missive. If you're defending, you automatically block D3 hits, or 3 hits automatically if you control the coin zone. This is another example of extreme versatility in the neutral faction in their cards. You can use this on the offensive or the defensive, and each one of those spots that you would control are very well associated with that style of play. You're going to be healing when you're being put on the defensive, and you're going to be attacking, or you're going to be wanting more tactics cards if you're actually being on the offensive, so that you can hit more things to multiply the efficacy of your army. A really great card that exemplifies the entire feel of the neutral faction. The next one is Bribery. When you claim the coin zone on the tactics board, you may replace its effect with choose one. One enemy unit becomes weakened and loses all abilities this round, or one enemy NCU loses all abilities and may not activate if it has not done so this round. So the reason why Bribery is so good when it doesn't really seem like it up front is that the coin zone is not one that's particularly taken early, because people are going to want to actually utilize the full effect of it by getting the healing back on that on a unit. But when units haven't taken wounds, the tactics board, or this tactics position, doesn't really do anything for you. So as a neutral faction, you want that zone to turn on a lot of your cards. So what Bribery does is it allows you to take that zone early and get some really cool abilities out of it, so that you can make sure you don't give up that zone later if you're not losing units or anything. It's a really interesting card that doesn't seem like it on the surface, but it does come with some really cool, powerful abilities that are really going to help further your ability to win the game. The last card in the neutral faction tactics deck is Spoils of War. When an enemy unit is destroyed, you can roll a d6. You restore that many wounds +2 across any number of friendly units. If you control the coin zone, you may roll 2 dice and select the highest results. So this is really great for getting some of your units back up to functioning power. I mean, we can take the coin zone. We want the coin zone. But when you are taking a ton of casualties, sometimes that coin zone really isn't going to do a whole lot for you because it's just going to be one unit. But this allows you to do it over multiple units. And that's interesting because you can fill a unit back up to a full rank if they only need 1 or 2 models, and then you'll still have the D3 left over to put back in some other units that might need it to get back up to a better functioning status. And if you have the coin zone, you can you'll not only will you have already healed some more, but you also can increase the D3 or D6 by rolling an extra die out of it. So that rounds out the entirety of the tactics deck. Now, from the Bolton perspective, every single one of the things that the tactics deck brings, the Boltons are really not great at. They don't have the best morale stats. They don't have a ton of ways to mess with your opponent's army if you're not playing Roose Bolton. And there's not a whole lot of ways to... There aren't a whole lot of ways right now to multiply your attacks unless you've got something like Braun or Brienne in your unit. So the neutral tactic deck is so flexible, and it's going to be really interesting to see how other neutral factions or neutral houses that come out affect the way this tactic deck works. It's a very exciting thing to watch this kind of evolve, and if you're playing the neutral faction and really enjoying some lists, you can post them in the comments below. I didn't really want to go over lists in this one because it's not that it's formulaic, it's just that there isn't a whole lot you can really mess with in terms of variability. It's always about how many units you would bring of this. So really you can put just about anything together in a neutral army and make it work. I could even see something like 2 units of Bastards Girls with Braun and Brienne attached to each unit to just try and pinch off some things from the side and jam your opponent up pretty well with those with some hardcore attacks. Any other questions, feel free to leave them below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep seeing what I'm putting out or be notified of what I'm putting out. You would just click the bell icon that's in just below the video here. That'll just have YouTube let you know whenever I post something new. Like this video if you liked it, and if you want to see more from me, I post all the YouTube updates and a bunch of other hobby and other game thoughts on Big Top Gaming's Facebook page. So buzz on over there, give it a like if you want. Otherwise, I look forward to making the next video and hope you enjoyed this one.